This is the Technology Advisory Professionals Technology, Innovation, and Growth podcast hosted by Sean Gaines-Harris. This podcast is dedicated to supporting business leaders and entrepreneurs in choosing technology, finding innovation, and achieving growth. Enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the show. I'm Sean Gaines-Harris, and today's episode is Strategy and Architecture. Are they the same thing? We're joined today by two friends and leaders in their respective areas, and I'm glad they could come on the show. Sterling Hamilton has been for 15 years disrupting the traditional view of technology and help customers think differently. As a director of innovation, he focuses on data and analytics to management and AI. Sterling's got 4 kids, owns a cigar factory, and sadly somehow cheers for the 49ers. Rodney Frank, the Calgarian who's been on the show a few times and is still resisting the siren song of the burning Cuyahoga, is a TOGAF certified architect who advises business leaders and guides business into value spending of their technology dollars. How are you guys today?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it, Sean.
Excellent.
Likewise.
So today's conversation is around strategy and architecture. And the premise is that are they the same thing? And this topic comes to light only because it seems many businesses equate the two as equivalent. And I'm not sure that is necessarily the case. Rodney, let me start with you as an architect. How do you define the difference between strategy and architecture?
Well, I think one of the important distinguishing factors is that strategy really is what is used to inform architecture. You may have several different strategies at play. You may have a business strategy, you may have an IT technology strategy, you may have a cloud strategy. There may be several strategies at play that are sort of just guiding posts that are used by architects and designers to then go in and make your IT system sort of align with those strategies and to put the right pieces of technology in place. We've talked in past episodes about the right spending decisions. Well, if I have two basically equivalent things, and I could do one in a server in my data center locally, or I could do one up in the cloud. Strategy is what's the one that would break the tie, right? Like it would be, our strategy is cloud first. We want to operationalize those costs. That strategy in itself may be informed by a business's decision as to whether capital is at a premium or whether operational dollars are at a premium. And so those types of decisions come from those strategies inform other strategies sort of conversations.
Right. And in your experience, is there a like a black hole or a white space there in strategy where many companies aren't necessarily taking advantage of strategy and instead deferring to architecture?
I think it's kind of an interesting question because when I look at sort of my experience in the past, you either have a company that started off in technology and they're kind of starting to wind their way up to figuring out what strategy and architecture truly are. They've started from a place of design where they've got all the fancy tools and they know about all these different technologies and they're trying to figure out how to put them together, in which case there's 1,000 ways you can put together a server kind of a scenario, but this is the one that works for me. Versus you've got companies coming in and they've got all these business strategies of I'm a capital spending organization because we have lots of investor dollars, but our OPEX needs to stay low. And so these business leaders kind of have this other view of the world that may or may not align with those technology professionals. And so architecture and strategy really are the middle glue that kind of get us there. And I think depending on the partner that you choose, those are not easy conversations to have. In a lot of cases, the technology people may not truly understand a business strategy and how that relates to them. and vice versa. You may have a company or a client that's coming in to a technology company that has no sense of strategy or architecture, but they're like, we want you to do our IT. And really, those are some of the first decisions and guiding posts that need to be in place for that relationship to be successful.
Right, right. Hey, Sterling, your love of San Francisco 49ers notwithstanding, when you look at, you come from a different side of the business, obviously. Rodney over here is technical and architect focus, and you're more of the business and sales focus. And I think the question I have for you, and what I'd like to try to delve into is, do customers understand the difference in between strategy and architecture? And secondly, is there a desire on their side to get deeper into either of those areas?
Well, yeah. So the big thing, I mean, oftentimes the way that I differentiate kind of strategy and architecture is the clients have to know why. Why are we doing this? That's the strategy component. If they don't know the why and what they want to achieve as the end result, then they can dance around in all these circles and have people architect lots of environments. If we put it to an example of, let's say we were the city of Calgary, and our goal and our strategy was to grow the city of Calgary's population. Okay, that's a great strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Within that, you have a bunch of architectural components. So you'll have land architects, you'll have building architects, you'll have all these different ones. And if you started at one of those to just say, hey, we're going to architect a building or a skyrise, well, okay, that doesn't have a strategy around it. That's just putting something up and hoping that it's going to be filled with people and they're just going to come. But if we don't answer the why, and that's the biggest thing, is clients don't care what Rodney does. They don't want to know what all these technologies are that he's putting in place. Great. He can give me buzzwords like Microsoft and, buzzwords like VMware and things like that. Sounds great to them, but they don't care. What they care is that it works. And what our job is to align that technology with their strategy as a business, so then they can see that, hey, we can actually benefit from technology. It's not just an expense. It's not just something that we need to sit there and spend this money just to operate. That's the biggest kind of gap from the client side, is oftentimes they walk in and say, well, I just want it to work. I have this kind of budget, and the right questions aren't asked. And that's a fault to the IT sector for the longest time, because
Right.
they kind of stayed in a separate bubble. And I mean, Sean, you did your MBA. When you kind of learned, the stuff about business versus IT, I think it just opens the door of understanding, okay, technology is the forefront of how businesses run these days. But if you went and asked a CEO, what makes your business succeed? How many of them are going to say technology and my investment in this, right? Not a lot of them. And that's what's interesting, is getting them to understand that, we can align technologies with your strategy, but you need to define what your end goals are in order to have that right architecture. And that's the biggest difference between the two.
Right, right. So you bring something up in there that is interesting, in that the, for lack of desire or whatever that is, the knowledge of that technology space is not often there in that C-level, in that C-suite. Is that, from a sales side, I see that as an opportunity, and from a business side, I see that as a risk. Is that fair to categorize it that way?
Yeah, I'd say it's an opportunity, and from the business, it's a risk, because you are now basically putting all of your eggs in a basket, right, of trusting someone else without fully understanding. And that's why we see, I like to call it kind of the random acts of technology. And why does that happen? Because changeover within an organization, within their IT staff, changeover in management, changeover in strategy, all these changes. And then all of a sudden you have these technologies that aren't meant to talk to each other, that you want to talk to each other. And, if you simplify that down to, why are our company's main pain points? Like, how many times do I see it in the ticket area where they're like, password reset is the biggest ticket volume generation? Well, okay, that's like the easiest thing to solve, yet people sit there and harp on it, and they complain and they say, well, our IT provider sucks because, we always have these tickets and these tickets are high and password reset this and password reset that. Well, that's just a simple user error. It doesn't make the user a bad user. It was funny. I had a conversation today and he said, what drives me nuts? When IT people say that clients are dumb or clients are annoying. Well, are you an accountant? Can you do a balance sheet? Can you do their job? Their job isn't IT. So
Right.
it might be easy for you to understand those things, but for them, it's not. So you have to look at it from that lens on the business side to understand, okay, does their strategy align to architect the right solutions? Because if someone like Rodney doesn't know that, then, quite frankly, he's just throwing mud at the wall and hope it sticks. And then he knows what he knows, and anything outside of that is going to make it more difficult for him. So innovation then doesn't happen.
Right. So back to you, Rodney. When we look at obviously the framework that you've chosen to focus on, which is the Open Group Architectural Framework, or TOGAF, how is that? How do they link the two worlds? Like, what's the best way to explain that? And what are the type of things that I guess a business leader who is looking to align strategy and architecture, is there anything in there that they can go, you know what, this is a critical piece for me to understand so I know what people are talking about?
I'm really not sure, to be honest, how to answer that question. When I look at the TOGAF model, it's basically sort of a circular framework for how to enable, I guess, a business critical piece to sort of come in and get put through the circle and wind out with something on the very end that meets all of those check boxes throughout the whole process. So, the very first stop on that wheel is setting up an architecture practice. How will we operate an architectural practice within the organization? And to sort of describe a little bit for viewers and business people, what TOGAF represents is that there's sort of several different layers of architecture. You have enterprise architecture, the sort of melding of IT and the business. And then secondly, you've got solutions architecture, which is a step sort of on the opposite side of the enterprise framework, where now we actually figure out, we're going to plug in VMware, or we're going to plug in Microsoft, or we're going to choose our components at that part. So, where do you start? Well, first you need to sort of define, I guess, how architecture should play within your organization. And then sort of between the two worlds, the business world and the architecture world, you'll start to figure out what the right questions are for your organization to ask in terms of strategy. It'll sort of be the net outcome of setting up that architecture practice that establishes some of that.
Right. So, and that's perfect for the enterprise class environment, right? To set up that architectural practice. But if we boil that down into a smaller business, say, and I'm going to harp on the thing that I tend to always go back to, that I feel is a bit missing in some businesses as they grow, is that mission, vision, and values. Is there something, and I'll throw it open to both you guys, is there anything out there that in your mission, vision, and values that you should be able to see a provider talk to you about and go, okay, this aligns with me, or this, is outside of what I'm hoping for?
Well, I think the biggest one there is we have to realize that SMBs and mid-market businesses, what's their goal in the private sector? To make more money. That's why they're opening a business, right? Their strategy is to make more money and increase their margin. And what our goal in the IT space is to allow them to focus on their business against their competition and not be focusing in on stuff like IT architecture, right? They don't need to be doing that. There's people like Rodney out there that can easily do that for them, get it to a stage that they need. And I think it goes nicely into, how complex does a client's architecture need to be? How, if they don't have a defined strategy, can we help them get there from a technology standpoint to say, okay, this should be your strategy, but the strategy should always be focusing on what they do and what they do best, with having that supporting structure of IT enabling them to do that. And that's
I think what you're saying, what you're saying actually is very critical in there, is that, in the absence of having a formal IT strategy, where do you start? And, Sean, when you say that, what's my mission, what's my vision, what's my business, strategy and goals, and what are the sort of guiding posts that I've set up for my business? Really, that is the starting point for IT strategy. And then we work backwards from there to create the more technical elements, or the more, IT focused pieces of that. And it's that mission vision type conversation that really spurs or starts that questioning. You should be able to tell from a company's vision or their mission, are they looking for very quick, specific interactions with a client where they're in and they're out and they're done? Or is it more the building of that long-term relationship with their customers that's their focus? All of those things will help you determine sort of how to wind that into an IT strategy, or to start to even look at architecture once you've got those strategic goalposts in place from an IT perspective. One of the biggest questions that you'll be asked as an IT strategy developer, is you want to know from the business, how do you budget? What's your typical spend right now in IT? And then how do I start to optimize that so that you're getting value out of it with the solutions that we're bringing to the table? We know that you're not where you need to be now. We know you're going to have to spend to get to that point, but let's work on, some of those pieces to help you make the right spend in the right places, and develop the strategy, develop the architecture as we go. I think they're all sort of ongoing and constant conversations that should be employed with a company throughout the life of the IT provider in the organization. And so if you're not having those conversations on a frequent basis with your provider, and checking in on the strategy and making sure that it still aligns, and seeing how these architectures are aligning with the strategy as you go, there's a missing piece in there for sure.
Right. I mean, I agree in all of that. And one thing that I would add, just from my own personal standpoint, is there are a lot of really intelligent and well-meaning IT architects, we'll call them, who as smart as they are and as capable as they are, kind of miss the business side of things, meaning they don't really, they propose a solution that's great, technically it's fine, but kind of misses that, what are we trying to accomplish out of that? And I think that if I have my own 2 cents in there, I think that the best advice I would give to a business leader is have your goal, and then have that person explain how this achieves their goal outside of technology.
Right.
And if they really struggle with that, it might be a telling conversation.
In that architectural circle that I was talking about, one of the last steps you do is that going back and making sure that all those check marks are in place. to sort of take that TOGAF circle and make it smaller for a small business. It truly is. It's you hit a point in there where you're actually designing the solution. You're deciding, are we going to go with something cloud? Are we going to go with something on premise? Is there an already boxed solution that somebody sells that's going to fit this, or are we developing our own? And when you get to those milestones, there's a couple of different check-in points where you go back and you say, is this still meeting our strategy? Is it still meeting our vision? Are we achieving all the business requirements that we've sort of laid out in the development of this design? And if yes, that's when you pass that stage gate and are able to carry on through the circle, to complete the project. But what we see a lot of technology companies come in and do is, the business will ask the original question, I need to fix my login problem. And then there's no communication through the process. And suddenly, bang, they've got this architecturally sound design that's been put in place. All the technological components are there, but they've missed the mark because it's 20 times more complicated. There's a user interface there that the person has to remember a bunch of questions. What was your dog's name in second grade? And and it's missed the point because it's going to take them twice as long now than it used to just simply place the phone call to IT. So there's some situations where it's okay to see a high ticket count for password resets, because the alternative is we spend a lot of time to develop this, maybe slightly less than user-friendly interface for people, and they now have a much more challenging password reset experience. We know that that's a human condition, and so we design around that. We make our decision around that.
Oh, and I think that was a good point on the password, because oftentimes when you see that, it's because they need a different login for all the different applications and all of the different things. It's not where a solution could be single sign-on. You can set that up and architect an environment, Rodney, that solves most of that. What does that do?
We solved the wrong problem. We solved the password reset problem, but we didn't realize the password resets are because there's 20 different passwords for all these applications. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and they all have different parameters, and they're not the same, and they have to be either complex or this, that, or the other thing. And then what happens is the companies start eating away their budget. It's not profitable for the IT service provider because their ticket volumes are higher. So then they don't pay as close attention to that company and what's going to benefit. And it becomes a lose-lose rather than a win-win. And then companies sit there and they're like, well, maybe I'll bring in my own IT staff. And then they decide to bring in their own IT staff. And it's like, okay, now they're going to architect what they know. And that's good. But where's his career path? Does he get to grow in that company, or does he just sit there for 25 years and manage an IT environment that he set up, that he knows, and it doesn't really spark innovation? And it doesn't really...
Even in an in-house implementation like that, you still need those strategy and architecture conversations.
Yeah, and you have to align those because, as a business, you would like to grow. And growing just doesn't mean, okay, we have more users, so now the IT guy can go hire a couple people to help support it. That's not the right strategy. That's very much a, just going in and finding someone to architect a solution and not having an IT strategy with your business.
Right. So the last question I have for you, Sterling, before I know I didn't prepare you for this, but I'll give you a minute to, after we're done, to kind of fill us in on what you're doing with Vivanti, if you so choose. But the question I have is, from your perspective, are business leaders interested in are they starting to make decisions based on strategy, or are they just making decisions, or are they looking for conversations just based on somebody needs to manage my IT? Or
so I think initially they're normally making their decisions off of what they feel they have a budget for.
Right.
So it's very much a financial.
Right.
If you get the opportunity to have the conversation and you redirect to a more of a strategy and say, okay, well, what are your business goals for the next 3 years? How do we align technology with those business goals? That's great. We can have that conversation. But initially, when they go in there, it's normally If they're reaching out to you, it's because they're unhappy with their current one, or they think that they're spending too much money. And it comes down to that. That's where the executive, it seems to be a money conversation, which is completely the wrong type of way to look at things. You can give a budget of anything. I can add some technologies in there to make it fit within your budget, but is that going to meet your business goals? Likely not.
Right.
Because it's never budgeted properly, because it's based on historic and not based upon forward thinking.
Right. And as an innovation person, that must bother you.
I picked up on something in your track there that's an important thing to call out too, because from my descriptions of strategy and these conversations you need to have, it might sound a little overwhelming to a business professional, but really those 3 or 4 questions that you started with, it's really the starting point. It turns into maybe something you're touching on quarterly from that point on, or something monthly, depending on how broken IT feels to the executive. But it's those simple questions, that you're asking. It doesn't need to be something long and drawn out, and you have to spend a whole whack of time with this company to kind of develop this massive strategy. Strategies can be small.
Right. Great. So as a conclusion, I guess what we've decided here is that strategy and architecture are definitely separate from each other. Architecture feeds off of strategy, and strategy is the key pillar. And business leaders should be making decisions, or at least IT decisions, based on their business strategy, and ensuring that somebody can articulate back to them that their technology, in fact, meets their strategic goals, and it has to be a sound meeting of that. I think that's what we've kind of talked about today. So that's great. Sterling, you got a minute if you want to plug Vivante.
So it's actually pronounced Vivante.
Oh, sorry.
So it's interesting. So I own a cigar factory in the Caribbean, in the Dominican Republic, and I'll talk a little bit of a strategy. Obviously, being that the factory is located in a tourist destination, when COVID hit, that was, if you look at it from the surface level, okay, the business is probably going to close. I've got to, shut down the restaurant, shut down the factory, because what am I going to do? But with the right strategy and actually using technology, our business has grown tenfold, because the competition, sat there and just kind of gave up. Right. But what we do is we're handmade cigars, but we customize them to the clients, and you're adding that physical touch. And I mean, Americans are pretty big on cigars, but the challenge that I have is I can't accept PayPal,
right?
Because I'm not a big company that can pay PayPal to say, yeah, okay, grandfather me in, because it's a tobacco. So developing the right technical strategy in order to how can I accept online payments without changing things and making consumers think that their privacy, that has changed us, because now we get a lot of online orders, and people are ordering them on a regular, because why? They can't go into their local cigar shop, so they're going to start Googling things, and they're going to look up stuff.
Great.
And so you change that strategy, and it's been successful. So
awesome. What's your website for that?
It's www.vivantecigars.com.
Excellent. All right. Excuse me. So we'll put a pin in this for today. If you have any questions for Rodney or for Sterling, please send an email to podcast@tapintotech.com, and I'd be happy to pass that on. We'd be happy to make those connections. We're always looking to connect business people, because it's critical that we keep those partnerships going. All right, gentlemen, thanks again for joining us today, and we'll talk to you hopefully very soon. Stay safe and healthy.
Thanks a lot, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for having us. You bet.
We hope you've enjoyed the Technology Innovation and Growth Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or would just like more information, please feel free to reach out to us at podcast@tapintotech.com. If you have any questions for me, Sean Gainge Harris, my email is sgangeharris@tapintotech.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and at www.tapintotech.com. Music provided today by www.bensound.com. Thank you for listening.